Hello, everybody. I'm going to be a little bit high energy because I haven't slept for 3 days. I'm totally jet lagged, having come in from New York to be here. It's wonderful to be together in person. Thank you to our sponsors, thank you to our clients who are here, and our ecosystem partners. So you might be saying IBM, really? We're growing. We're growing in so many ways, and we have a new confidence about our relevance across all of the industries and enterprises where we are active. We're still a $73 billion business with a market cap of $125 billion, so not trivial, and wonderful to be growing after a period of complexity. Why are we growing? It's because we've simplified. And we focused on what really matters to our clients by listening and by trimming our portfolio and ensuring that everywhere we look, we're focused on solving the most important problems. Now, in thinking about unlocking the hidden value of data, which is something that I think almost every fintech does in one way or another, I wanted to start this journey with my own personal reflection. And I have many, many banking and financial services and insurance relationships. And I certainly won't name and shame any of the guilty here or celebrate those who do it really well. But I want you to know that every CTO, every chief data officer, every CIO that I meet says, I have a fantastic data, a fantastic analytics, and a fantastic AI platform. And I say, well, really? Because why do you still think I'm a student? I've never been a student in my relationship with that first bank, never, ever. But they treat me and message me as a student. And you can see, I don't need to read these to you, but imagine my frustration as a client of these companies. And it's my job to work with these companies to ensure that they're actually doing this well. Now, imagine after having a relationship with a major credit card provider for 15 years, that they will still only extend a $500 limit to me. It's just mind-blowing to me. But when I think about who does it well, and, you'll figure some of this out maybe. The ones that do it really well delight me and make me want to work with them and make me want to expand that relationship. And so, one of them is pretty obvious with 2 choices. Anyway, why are these experiences so varied? It's because of a firm's ability to use the data it already holds. And they either do or don't do that, and it's how they use that data. There's no question in my mind that everyone wants to do this properly, and everyone wants to do it well. But they don't. They just don't. So we've thought about this in terms of the AI ladder. And I think it's important, especially given that AI is such a big topic. There are some really fundamental ways to think about it. We view this as a 4-layer model. And we've tested this across thousands of engagements because we've been active in data and analytics for years. We see at the moment the temptation and the tendency is to always go straight to analyze. Those projects rarely succeed, they rarely scale, and they rarely generate profound results. And the reason being that we would argue, if you haven't done the basics of collect and organize, you can't scale AI properly. And so that's one of the constant topics that pretty much every one of our clients is discussing with us and discussing with every other one of their technology partners. How do they actually gain leverage and value? And I know this is a massive list of crazy inabilities, but if you look at the enterprise view of data, these are exactly the situations you'll encounter. Within an organization, you just can't find data. You can't access it. You don't know what you've got. If you do know what you've got, perhaps you can't connect to it. You can't protect it when you redistribute it. So there's a massive list of architectural challenges. And I'm sure that many of you see these as you work within your ecosystems. And when you think about the kinds of data that fuels the platform-based services that fintechs and insurtechs provide. Data and insight underpins the way that you offer products through your new channels and new platforms. So we set about approaching this through a data fabric approach. And again, more reading for you. I'm not here to make you read. But I wanted this to be something that you could take away and think about. This is our way of enabling clients to find data in the organization, connect to it, classify it, and then make use of it in analytic and AI-driven pipelines. When we think about how this has been done previously, we think of a classic example in this space of Customer 360 and regulation. Catalogs were used by organizations purely for regulatory purposes. So a catalog was a place where we would keep the metadata, data about data of an organization, and say, I have all of these data sets, all of these data systems, they contain these data models, and the data within those data models is described in some kind of way. That's a governance-centric view of data. It's not an analytic or an insight-based view. It's purely to be able to say to a regulator, I know what data I have. And most of the time, these looking back systems are wildly inaccurate and not useful. So when we think about this, the graphic here shows a classic view of what happens in most enterprises. Data systems are so disconnected and siloed that it's impossible to create cross-platform insights and drive new opportunities to either grow business, protect the business, make better decisions, grow relationships, and so on. As we think about the benefit a data fabric is intended to bring, it's around creating that universal connectedness across all data systems and all data sources and sets. And why do we want to do that? Not just because we want to connect, but because we want to create mashed up views of that data and drive that data into an AI pipeline, having applied governance, security, and privacy controls to it. And so that's what we do as we bring these capabilities together. A set of layered capabilities enable that approach of connecting to the data across every type of API, every type of connectivity, every type of structured or unstructured data, and, for want of a better word, inhaling that into an environment using that data within the environment without necessarily moving it. Data systems are full of duplication today. Every organization is using copies of data and ETLing that data left, right, and center. And that's cost, it's duplication of data, and it's exposure of privacy and security controls, every which way you look at it. Duplication is a high-risk activity, and it exposes organizations to risk. So our ability to connect to these data sources without moving data and duplicating that is high value. It also reduces the latency within our analysis of data because we're not making time-based copies. We're always using current data. How we organize that is how we populate the catalog. Catalogs in the past were populated by hand, a deadly activity for anyone involved in it, and one that consumed massive amounts of labor and resource. When we look at data today, we're using an AI model to populate the catalog automatically and discern what's in a data system or data source and assign a description to the data in there automatically. That's both helpful for governance purposes in explaining to a regulator what exists, but it's also useful in terms of enabling the citizen data scientists in our organization to know what's available and how to connect to it. As we use that catalog, as I said, we're using it not just to describe the data for a static purpose, but to make sources of data available inside the organization on a self-service basis, that we can create different views, combined views, and then drive that into the AI pipelines and deploy those models once trained and evaluated. Privacy is something that we can apply automatically. And we can do that because we can recognize characteristics of data in a data model and protect it. Obviously, there are so many reasons why data would need to be protected, and we can do that while preserving analytic integrity. So we can still obscure data in such a way that enables it to be analyzed. And then the AI pipeline, we know that data scientists today are spending 85% of their time preparing, writing code to essentially load data into an environment. It's completely wasteful, and it's really a misuse of resource. When we can do that data preparation work automatically, it enables a data scientist to actually focus on generating insight rather than cleansing data. And testing that insight, determining whether there is bias in an insight. And of course, because we can do this in any environment, it reduces the limits that we have on where training data sits and how training data moves in or out of an organization. Once those insights are created, they can be readily deployed and are API callable from any application. And so that's what we've been working on with a number of clients. And we see that unlocking a lot of value. Our clients tell us that this is something that they want to use. And part of the reason why they see us as being interesting in this space is because other providers have approached this in a very niche way that is typically oriented to a specialism that they have, for example, a purely catalog-based focus or a purely data virtualization approach. We've approached this from end to end, and our clients like that. So do Gartner and Forrester, who regard this capability as very, very differentiated. So I talked about all the things we couldn't do in the past and all of the organizational channels. When I spin that around and turn it the other way, I think about what we can now do and why that matters. And the challenge here is not for me to suggest to you what you could do with that and how you could use that. It's really for you to imagine what you can do once you have limitless access and connectivity and an ability to create insight faster. There's this, again, lots of words here. We won't read that. The point that I want to make to you is that there's a very simple and well-defined sequence to how the data fabric capabilities are used. It's a sequence that, regardless of the use case, a data scientist, a data preparer will use. It doesn't deviate because it doesn't need to. And it's represented in the top right corner. Simple steps that represent how we bring data into a platform, catalog it, categorize it, make it available with privacy controls applied, security controls applied, train a model, test a model, evaluate a model, and then deploy that model. 2 clients I draw your attention to who are using this today. ING, exactly for customer 360 type of activities. They want to get data from, value from siloed data. The silos are prevalent in every one of the financial services organizations. And typically one of the greatest silos that exists is between a customer master system and a product processor system. They are completely separate, they are often siloed, and they talk to each other only when essential. And that's a huge issue because if you're in the business of driving your relationships or protecting your relationships, the lack of insight across customer and product means that you're never really doing customer 360 or customer 720 properly. Now, another industry which has figured out that silos are deadly is telco. And so I mention that because they appear to be much more comfortable to break down the silos, be less territorial about this, and use their data to drive their business harder, which is, in many respects, what every client of ours wants to do. They're either driving for growth or they're driving to protect. And so I will make opportunity to ask, for you to ask questions. By all means, please feel free to connect with me, and I'll happily discuss this with any of you. With that, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, John. As you saw there, John had his email up on there, and maybe you can interact with John via the event app as well.
Of course.
I was going to say any questions, but a hand is shot up straight away. We'll take a few questions from the floor, and then I'll come back to the wall.
Certainly.
Could you just start by saying your name and organisation you're from, please?
Sure. Hi. Thanks, John. Thanks for the talk. Really interesting. So, Rob Cossins here. I'm from Scribe. We've spent a lot of time with banks over the last kind of 18 months or so, and I suppose I had 2 observations from that. Firstly, that banks view machine learning to be a competitive advantage sometimes and don't necessarily like using off-the-shelf solutions. The second, I suppose, observation would be that although banks are moving to the cloud, they're quite sensitive about particularly personal data. So I'd be really interested to know from your perspective, are there banks that are a bit more forward-thinking on that? What's been your experience in deploying this kind of solution to some of the larger banks?
Great question. So the first question was, the first part, so let's talk about where this is being deployed. The first part was around who's doing this properly. I think, in my estimation, and we had a similar conversation about this earlier with the Bank of England, I think most of what's happening right now is experimentation, mostly. I think there's a wild appetite to go beyond experimentation. I think there's this huge struggle to go beyond experimentation for a couple of different reasons. The more people are active in this space, the more they realize that there are struggles with their training data. And as a result, there's a huge amount of bias in algorithms. That bias often isn't detected until it's too late. And there have been classic examples where the embarrassment around those situations has been giant, and the fallout from those situations has created massive caution. In terms of how people are doing this in clouds, they certainly are doing this in every cloud. Our approach to this is that our clients want a consistent way of doing this, and they don't necessarily want to have to bring their data to the cloud. They want to bring the cloud to their data. And so how do you do that? With an open software layer that can run anywhere, which is how we're approaching this. Across a whole set of technology domains, every software that we release these days is intended to run anywhere. So the appetite should be an indicator that this, we're on a path here. The regulators are also on a path here around what will be acceptable from the point of view of explainability. And that will be a must. Transparency and explainability is a must in any of the algorithms. Everything that we do in our algorithms is open. So we can bring in any algorithm onto our platform, providing it's available to us to do that. If it's proprietary in a particular service, that may be a challenge. But certainly any open standard, open source API, any AI framework can come onto our platform.
Was there another question on the floor? Yes, please.
So when you're working with these large global enterprises, how do you get past the cultural resistance to hoard data within a departmental silo? So it's a hierarchical question, it's a cultural question. You can't just give a linear data, here's how to flow the data through and keep it private and secure, but there's so much human resistance.
I love the question, actually, because we've thought about this a lot. You approach the person who cares the most, and that's usually someone in a line of business who needs an outcome. We can play with central architecture functions all day long. They don't necessarily care to solve these problems the way that, with the level of speed and efficiency that someone in a line of business needs. They're more inclined to care about architectural standards or a particular cloud provider choice, or could be anything, or have a completely risk-averse view of using any kind of cloud, be it hybrid, public, or otherwise. And so the way that we have found is the fastest route to adoption is directly with line of business stakeholders. And that's an area where, as IBM, we are managing our relationships both with technology and the line of business in each of these organizations.
Any more questions? Okay, can't see any there. Okay, so John, is data the most important aspect for customer experience?
I would say it's one of the most important aspects. But it's not the only one. It's also the automation that sits behind a digital channel. It's how that front to back experience actually works. It's one thing, it's one thing to have a nice front-end channel that's well infused with insight and data. That falls apart very, very quickly if the fulfillment experience doesn't work. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you have a chatbot that doesn't actually help, that creates massive frustration. Arguably, that's a data problem as much as anything else. If you struggle with different experiences across channels, or can't find what you need because of fundamental design issues, or a lack of end-to-end fulfillment, that's also very significant in the client frustration and a good fulfillment of a client experience. Data is hugely important. Data and insight, they're not the only things.
Okay. And does digital transformation fail without the correct data?
Oh, We've had, yes, simply put, yes, almost every time. So when we think, so many of our clients are thinking about application modernization. Many of them have 50-year-old core systems, and those systems run the same code that they did 50 years ago. They run them rather well. They're mission critical. You wouldn't ever touch them casually. But of course, you want to add new products, you want to add new services, and you want to build new core capabilities onto the side of some of these systems. And so as we think about how to do that, it isn't just about building containers, deploying those containers into Kubernetes, exposing APIs on a platform approach. If you're not also thinking about how the data modernizes, you're leaving the experience to fall short. So I would always argue that, we have a bunch of expressions in IBM like there's no AI without IA, there's no AI without information architecture. I would argue there's no application modernization without data modernization. It's a crucial part of the modernization and the digital transformation journey.
Okay, if there's no more questions from the floor, last chance, everyone? No? Okay, well, we'll call it a day there. Thank you, John.
Thank you, everybody.
I'll just take that. Thank you, John.